Yeah, so it's been a little while. However, now that school's all wrapped up and I have some free time, I thought it'd be a good idea to start talking about video games again. Today's topic, whether or not video games should be considered art. Seeing as I love art and video games, naturally this is a topic that has piqued my interest. However, whether or not video games should be considered art is kind of a loaded question, so let's just start with some background information. Video games have been around for, give or take, 50 years now, and while to many that may seem like a long time, in the grand scheme of things, they can be considered quite juvenile in comparison to other forms of entertainment. Films have been around since the late 1800s, theater and play have been around since the ancient Greece, and reading and writing have been widely used since the Mesopotamian Empire. So to put this in perspective, video games are essentially a little child, teenager at most, and the conversation as to whether or not video games should be considered art is like asking a child to determine their role in life. So now that that's taken care of, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. A good starting place when determining if video games should be considered art is looking at the definition of art. According to Oxford Languages, for something to be considered art, it must meet the following criteria. It must express creativity and imagination in some way, and it must be created with the intention of being appreciated primarily for its beauty or the emotion it evokes. Now you've heard the definition, and you think about it real good, and you think, yeah, the definition of art practically fits any and all video games, at least in some capacity, and that's true for just about anything else. Painting nails, organizing books, a birthday present, picking a screensaver, you get the point. So while video games do, in general, fit the definition of art, I don't think that alone proves that they should without a doubt be considered art. A much more relevant argument in my opinion is what the intention of the game was as it was being created. The intention of a video game is very important in determining whether or not it should be considered art, in my opinion. You got your Overwatches, your Pokemon, your Call of Duties. These games are essentially designed for two main reasons: to sell very well and to provide general entertainment. And this doesn't mean that these games can't appeal to emotions or be appreciated for their beauty. It's just not their primary objective. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. I just think that these types of games are much more questionable in whether or not they should be considered art. However, if a game's intention is to pursue creative and imaginative ideas, or to be appreciated for its beauty or emotional appeal, I'd say it should be considered art. Two recent examples of this would be Spiritfarer and the Ori games, both of which are incredibly charming. These two clearly intended to be appreciated on the basis of visuals and demonstrate creativity and imagination. However, as the video game industry continues to blossom, it'll start to feel more corporate, if that makes sense. This basically just means that the intentions of the game developers will skew more towards the direction of, I don't care, just make whatever will sell the best. One of the most logical arguments against video games being considered art is that they're just too restrictive and objective in nature. And technically that is true. Video games do impose limitations by having rules and specific goals. However, these rules just apply to those playing the games. Those who are actually making the games can create whatever they want in the same way that an artist can create whatever they want. Though I will agree that video games can feel more limiting than art, so again, this is probably one of the more valid arguments. The last point that I think is worth bringing up is that video games are essentially just a combination of other forms of art. Video games require music, writing, drawing, animation, you name it, video games have implemented it into their design process. And while this doesn't inherently make video games art, it does pose the question of, if video games are just a culmination of all these other mediums, why can't they be art? Of course, what you consider to be art is completely subjective and a matter of opinion, and I'm probably biased in this case seeing as I love video games, so take what I've said with a grain of salt. But for me, I think as long as the intentions of the game developer are pure, and it, at least in some capacity, meets the aforementioned criteria, a video game should be considered art. But again, that's just my opinion.